There are plenty of people ready to be cynical about lifestyle SUVs and the crossover models that copy them, but the reality is that without these kinds of cars, the 4x4 market would have petered out here long ago. With the X1, BMW has looked carefully at the most affordable end of this sector and produced a product carefully designed to suit a more sophisticated car of higher quality in the improved form that we're testing here. There are premium prices, true, but it's still a relatively affordable way into BMW's SUV family and provides most of what you get in the brand's more conventional 3 Series touring estate for a lot less money. Plus, of course, it handles better than a car of this kind has any right to do. But then any company capable of turning something Range Rover-sized into a sports car is hardly going to struggle with something this small. The X1 even boasts a set of economy and environmental figures strong enough to silence the green lobby. It is, in short, like it or not, a car of our times. Today, it's hard to imagine a BMW lineup without a range of X-Series performance-minded SUVs. They now account for over a fifth of the Munich brand's worldwide sales, with the starting point for the lineup, the model we're going to look at here, the much improved first-generation X1. Clearly, it's the car provided to get customers onto the first rung of a ladder that the Bavarians hope will lead to ownership of their larger and faster X3, X5 and even X6 models. But it's also there to give BMW a foothold in the growing market for so-called crossovers, cars like Nissan's Qashqai and Peugeot's 3008, family hatchback shaped, but with a 4x4's look and feel without the associated weight and high running costs. Now, these types of cars, along with RAV4 style soft-roading SUVs, tend to steal sales away from conventional compact lifestyle estates like BMW's own 3 Series Touring. Many buyers of the Bavarian brand who might have been tempted off in such directions have been kept loyal by this X1. But since its arrival here at the end of 2009, this model has been rather less successful in enabling the marque to garner conquest sales from the small SUVs and crossovers it's targeted against. Many felt that it lacked the premium feel of more recently introduced direct rivals like Audi's Q3, and even models from mainstream brands were starting to shade it in terms of technology and running cost efficiency. Hence the need for the much improved version, this car, launched here in the summer of 2012. With a smarter look, a much higher quality cabin, a more powerful range-topping twin-turbo diesel, lower running costs across the board, and the most sophisticated automatic gearbox in the sector, it looked much better placed for segment success. Let's try it. So, on the move. What's it like? Well, the driving position mirrors the drive itself, somewhere between a family hatchback and a proper SUV. Grasping the chunky 3-spoke wheel and peering down the sculpted bonnet, you sit higher than you would in a 1 Series or a 3 Series, but it's not like being in a conventional RAV4-like soft roader, and certainly you don't sit as high as you would in a BMW X3. Still, that's all to the good when it comes to chucking this car through a set of twisty bends. BMW claims that this model provides supreme agility in its class, whatever class that might be. And true enough, it certainly feels more accomplished than most other crossovers and small SUVs I've driven. There's remarkably little body roll and a slick 6-speed gearbox. The body roll is particularly impressive given the 1.6 tonnes of curb weight that this car must carry about. An X1 is certainly a lot more chuckable than an X3. More justification for the purchase of this car comes with the ride quality. Thanks to the multi-link rear suspension setup, it really is particularly good, better even than the 3 Series Touring estate that this car is based upon, and it makes light work of even badly rutted tracks, though the steering is a little heavier than buyers of compact BMWs will probably be used to. Assuming that these people haven't opted for the minority interest 184 brake horsepower 2-litre petrol variant, they might also notice a little more road noise from the 2-litre diesel engine that all other X1 variants must have, whether they be S-Drive rear-wheel driven or X-Drive 4-wheel drive. X1 diesel drivers certainly aren't short of choice, for this familiar common rail 4-cylinder turbo unit is supplied in 5 different states of tune: 116 brake horsepower in the entry-level 16D, 143 brake horsepower in the X1 18D, 163 brake horsepower in the frugal 20D efficient dynamics variant, 184 brake horsepower if you go for a normal X1 20D, and 218 brake horsepower in the range-topping twin-turbo X1 25D that I'm driving here. All are pretty rapid. Even the entry-level 16D manages rest to 62 miles an hour in 11.5 seconds on the way to a top speed of 118 miles an hour. At the other end of the scale, the 25D variant that I'm driving here manages the same rest to 62 mile an hour benchmark in just 6.8 seconds on the way to a top speed of 142 miles an hour, courtesy of 450 Newton meters of torque. I'm struggling to think of any small SUV for under £50,000 that's really much quicker than that. This 25D version comes only with the intelligent X-Drive 4-wheel drive system that's available on all X1 variants as an option, bar the entry-level diesel model. Now, like most other such systems of its kind in compact crossovers and SUVs of this sort, it's able to vary the torque between front and rear axles, hence the intelligent tag, depending on your driving requirements and the grip available. At the same time, when more traction is needed, all of the vehicle's traction, safety and stability systems will be optimized into 4-wheel drive mode. There's also hill descent control to ease you down slippery slopes. The whole thing's done seamlessly with no unfamiliar knobs to turn or buttons to press, but it's very much geared towards on-road, on-tarmac slippery conditions rather than off-piste antics. Even if you didn't know that, you could probably guess as much from one glance at the limited ground clearance, the tarmac tyres, and the lack of almost any kind of underbody protection. Issues which, to be fair, are shared by most of this car's competitors. All of which may lead you to conclude that 4-wheel drive, though nice to have in a snowy snap, may not be worth the marginal losses in performance and economy that you'll have to put up with for the rest of the year. For many buyers, a better use of the premium required for the X-Drive layout would be to invest in BMW's performance control system, which more accurately distributes torque between the rear axle during hard cornering. Or perhaps they should look at spending the money on BMW's 8-speed auto transmission. With both sport and paddle shift settings, it's easily the most sophisticated auto gearbox available in this market segment. Though few would see the X1 as beautiful, it has all the high-sided, big-wheeled butchness that's necessary in this part of the market. Now, though the name and the size, it's significantly smaller than a Freelander or a RAV4, suggest a 1 Series platform. There's actually a 3 Series Touring Estate chassis underneath flowing curves and bulges that now seem more appealing and cohesively combined than before. That's less because the shape has been substantially altered, it hasn't been, but more because the stylists have spent more time getting those all-important details right. So there's less cheap-looking grey plastic and more painted metal on show. The indicators have been incorporated into the wing mirrors, and there are redesigned headlamps too, with white LED corona rings and so-called active eyebrows when, as here, they're specified in xenon form. At the rear, larger painted areas echo the frontal treatment, and there's a more prominent underguard that's supposed to reinforce the sporty off-road appearance. It's at the wheel, though, where the biggest changes have been made. While the original version of this car used soft-touch plastics and materials in the areas that you commonly touched, you didn't have to look too much further than that to discover more down-market cabin finishes, which really wasn't good enough if this car was really going to tempt customers who'd, say, just test-driven an Audi Q3. So this improved version gets a completely redesigned centre console with a much higher quality surface finish and a high gloss black finish for the area surrounding the climate control and the stereo to match that around the air vents. There's also a higher quality finish around the gear stick, the cup holder and the headlamp switch. Build quality from the Leipzig factory, which also makes the 3 Series saloon, seems to be strong too. Collectively, it's still not enough to make this the plushest cabin in the class, but it's a very big improvement, with showroom appeal enhanced, as usual with all BMWs, by an excellent driving position and a simple, clear, uncluttered instrument layout. I like the little touches too, like this elasticated strap in the door bins that stops items from moving about. All-round visibility is generally good, though visibility out of the rear isn't enhanced by the rather shallow rear window. Rear seat accommodation will be fine for 2 adults once they've entered in through these rather narrow door apertures, provided that they're not over 6 foot tall. On shorter trips, you can squash up to provide space for a third middle seat occupant, provided that they're not the whinging sort, likely to object to this very high central transmission tunnel. On longer trips, you can adjust the angle of the rear seat backrest for greater comfort, though that will of course impact on the amount of luggage space you have behind you. Ah yes, luggage space. Now, though this car may be based on the underpinnings of a 3 Series touring estate, it's also significantly shorter than one of those. So the luggage space, quoted at 420 litres, is about 20% less, and about 30% less than you get with the 550 litres promised by a Bmw X1. You do, though, get this shallow underfloor storage area for valuables. And I mentioned earlier that the amount of space that you get is very much influenced by the angle of the rear back seat rest. So if it's in a very upright position, as here, you can extend your luggage bay capacity to as much as 480 litres. If, on the other hand, your rear seat passengers prefer to lounge back, then it can fall to as little as 360 litres. Still, you've got a very useful 40-20-40 split, and your luggage bay area can accommodate most typical loads, say a couple of 46-inch golf bags stowed widthways. Or if you fold down the centre part of this rear bench, you could stow them lengthwise. With this in position, you could also get in, say, a couple of snowboards or up to 4 pairs of skis. And with all of the bench flat, there's the capacity of up to 1,350 litres. Now, most X1s will be sold in the £24,000 to £35,000 bracket. You simply make your choice of engine, either a 2-litre petrol unit or one of 5 different versions of the 2-litre diesel. Then decide whether you want your car in rear-driven 2-wheel drive S-drive form, or for a £1,500 premium 4-wheel drive X-drive guise. Whatever your decision, you've got the option of paying £1,500 more for a 8-speed auto gearbox that's unique in this segment and that around 40% of X1 buyers tend to choose. Now, at the bottom of the range, I think it's probably worth finding another £1,000 on top of the cost of the rather feeble 116 brake horsepower 16D diesel, and get yourself into the 18D model that many tend to choose. That starts from around £25,000. From that point, you've got the choice of maybe finding another £1,500 to give yourself the selection of a couple of 2-litre D models, either the frugally minded 163 brake horsepower efficient dynamics version, or the full-fat 2-litre D, 20D model with 184 brake horsepower. First, I need to put this pricing into perspective from a BMW point of view. If you pitch this X1 against a version of the slightly larger X3 model with exactly the same engine, then this smaller car will save you anything between £2,500 and £4,000, depending on the variant that you're looking at. If on that basis you're content to stay as a potential X1 customer, then you'll need to know how that pricing structure puts this car against other potential rivals in its chosen segment. So, how does it stack up? Pretty well, actually, for the prices being asked are, after all, at first glance, broadly similar to those of this X1's most direct rival in the small premium crossover segment, Audi's Q3. The mainstream models in both lineups, the Q3 2-litre TDI and the comparably powerful X1 18D, are, after all, both priced at around £25,000. Look a little closer, though, and you might feel that, on paper at least, this X1 enjoys a significant advantage over its direct rival. Let's take choice. The Q3 range can't offer anything to rival the frugality of the X1 20D efficient dynamics or the power of this top X1 25D diesel. Then there's price. Many versions of this X1 can undercut their Q3 equivalents by up to £1,000. That's the advantage, for example, that a mainstream X1 20D X-Drive enjoys over a comparable Q3 2-litre TDI Quattro 177 PS. And it's a similar story when you compare a petrol X1 2-litre I to its Q3 equivalent, the 2-litre TFSI. So far, so good, but of course there are many other alternatives that potential X1 buyers might be considering. At one end of the spectrum there's the avant-garde Range Rover Evoque, but you've really got to like its styling to pay the premium being demanded over an equivalent version of this BMW, nearly £5,000. At the other end of the scale of cars of this kind, in the £20,000 to £30,000 bracket, there's still a lot of quality to admire in Volkswagen's Tiguan, which in mainstream 2-litre TDI form would save you a couple of thousand. But it's not much cheaper if you want a pokey four-wheel drive diesel, and in top four-wheel drive petrol version will actually cost you more than an equivalent X1. That only leaves the king of the crossovers, Nissan's Qashqai, and the comparable soft-roading compact SUVs that come to mind, Toyota's RAV4 and Honda's CR-V. Now, all three will cost you around £25,000 if ordered with four-wheel drive and a decently pokey diesel engine of around 150 brake horsepower. In comparison, the equivalent X1, the 18D X-Drive, will be cheaper to run than the Toyota and the Honda and will only set you back around £1,500 more than that, a premium much of which you'll get back with higher residual values at resale time. Now, whether you choose your X1 in 2-litre petrol or in 16D, 18D, 20D or twin-power turbo 25D, 2-litre diesel form with either S-Drive 2-wheel drive or X-Drive 4-wheel drive, you should find your car to be reasonably well specified. All variants will at least come with 17-inch alloy wheels, roof rails, rear parking sensors, dual-zone climate control, Bluetooth compatibility for your mobile phone, a decent quality USB-compatible CD stereo, and a leather-wrapped multi-function steering wheel. Options include BMW's performance control system that distributes power between the rear wheels for better handling and more accurate servotronic steering. Safety kit runs to the usual twin front, side and curtain airbags, as well as a whole suite of electronic safety features. There's ABS brakes, of course, but also CBC, that's cornering brake control, DBC, that's dynamic brake control, DSC, that's dynamic stability control, and DTC, that's dynamic traction control. All of this resulted in this car being awarded a full house 5-star rating in Euro NCAP safety testing. Options include a high beam assist set up for the headlamps that automatically dips them at night in the face of oncoming traffic. The diesel-dominated engine range in the X1 bodes well for its running cost figures, as does the adoption of BMW's efficient dynamics technology across the range. You get auto start-stop fitted to all the engines. That cuts the engine when you don't need it, stuck at the lights or waiting in traffic. It's fitted to both manual and auto gearbox models, and you also get brake energy regeneration, which reclaims the energy that would normally be lost under braking. Plus there's a gear shift light to help you decide when to change up. This improved model goes a stage further too, with the adoption of an Eco Pro mode, accessed via this button at the bottom of the centre console in front of the gear stick. Press it and the car becomes instantly targeted into frugality, with the engine throttle mapping tweaked, the shift characteristics of the optional 8-speed auto transmission changed, and even things like the seat heating and the climate control altered. A special display informs you of the extra range achieved through these measures. As with a lot of these things, unless you're in a particular hurry and need optimum acceleration, I can't really see why you'd ever turn it off. The result of all this cleverness is a set of class-leading running cost returns that easily shade those of Audi's rival Q3. The best performer in this respect isn't actually the least powerful 16D diesel X1 model, though that is pretty frugal for a car of this kind, managing 57.6 miles to the gallon on the combined cycle and putting out 128 grams per kilometre of CO2. Most of Munich's efforts when it comes to efficiency, though, have been dedicated towards one model. It's the X1 S-Drive 20D Efficient Dynamics variant. Available only with rear-wheel drive, this goes a stage further than its contemporaries in the X1 model lineup, adding to the recipe low rolling resistance tyres, a climate control compressor that can be disengaged when not needed, and on-demand use of ancillary units. All of which doesn't sound especially radical, but it does make a big difference to running cost returns. I'll need to put these into perspective. The X1 18D S-Drive and X1 20D S-Drive variants that most customers choose return almost identical running cost figures, 57.6 miles to the gallon on the combined cycle and about 128 grams per kilometre of CO2. In comparison, an X1 S-Drive 20D Efficient Dynamics variant manages 62.8 miles to the gallon on the combined cycle and 119 grams per kilometre of CO2. It's all pretty impressive, but there are a few things that you'll need to bear in mind when selecting your X1 model of choice. All variants, bar the entry-level 16D diesel and the S-Drive Efficient Dynamics 20D version that I've just been talking about, all other X1 models have the option of X-Drive four-wheel drive. But if you tick the box for it, your fuel and CO2 returns will be hit by about 10%. Which means, for example, that if you go for the 20D X1 model with X-Drive, you'll get 51.4 miles to the gallon on the combined cycle and put out 145 grams per kilometre of CO2. That rise could make a big difference on your tax return. Choose the flagship X1 model with the 218 brake horsepower twin-turbo 25D diesel engine that I'm driving here, and you have to have four-wheel drive X-Drive as part of the package. Still, the returns are pretty impressive, 47.9 miles to the gallon on the combined cycle and 154 grams per kilometre of CO2. And these are returns you can actually improve if you specify the efficient 8-speed automatic transmission to 51.4 miles to the gallon on the combined cycle and 145 grams per kilometre of CO2. What else? Well, insurance groupings range between 22 and 27, and residual values are as strong as you would expect for something bearing the BMW badge. Expect your car to be worth around 43% of what you originally paid for it after the usual 3-year, 36,000 mile ownership period. To buy this X1 in its original form, you needed to be sold on the idea of a BMW and possessed of a budget not quite generous enough to enable you to get the larger X3 model you'd ideally have chosen. In this much improved first generation form though, this car has set its sights a little higher. Yes, there are smarter and more purposeful looking SUVs and crossovers you could buy for the same kind of money, but against that, this BMW offers a range of unique selling points. Alone in this sector, it offers the option of a rewarding rear-wheel drive layout, and it has the most sophisticated and efficient 8-speed auto transmission in this part of the market. Plus, you get arguably ride quality and handling that are best in class. You'll also be tempted by the badge equity, of course, now properly supported by the premium feeling that you'll get behind the wheel or when the car's in your driveway. Add in running costs that are difficult to beat in this segment and you at last have a proposition that's good enough to reach out beyond the BMW faithful, especially to those well-heeled enough to afford this top 25D variant. After all, 218 brake horsepower and over 50 miles to the gallon aren't usually figures you hear together in the same sentence. It all adds up to a car now very well worth considering if you're looking for a satisfying ownership proposition amongst the many compact SUVs and crossovers now on sale. It still isn't an obvious choice, but now it's one you might just enjoy making.